I just wanted to get you to elaborate on your point that reform
Mm,
supporters aren't necessarily Brexiters. I thought that was really intriguing.
yeah. Mm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think because one of the things is if you look at the polling, right, around this, and you're constantly seeing, this like sort of 60% or so of people, this is the polling, it constantly tells us people who regret Brexit. I mean, where are these people coming from? If there's a majority in the country, then you should be seeing it kind of everywhere. And actually, you are genuinely when you go out into anywhere. I think there's this thing that's being sold to us by certain commentators that, your average person in Hartlepool is just really angry with the system and it's doesn't want anyone to reverse Brexit. And they're just terrified about Brexit being reversed. They're not.
So the question is, in Northern Ireland, there is a clear split between unionist and nationalist views with regard to Brexit, as
Mhm.
you probably noticed when you visited recently. If
Yeah.
reform and Nigel Farage was to get in as Prime Minister, where would that leave the likes of TUV, Jim Allister,
Yep.
DUP, Gavin Robinson et al., Kate Hoey, formerly Labour, but from Northern Ireland, and Ben Habib?
What I'd say about Northern Ireland, because I was there very recently, and I hadn't been to Northern Ireland in about 20 years. And it was the difference between Northern Ireland now and then was really, really fascinating. I mean, one of the things to say, there's so much to say about Northern Ireland. So trying to break it down. So one of the things I was really surprised about was how much more relaxed Northern Ireland seems to be about sort of being part of Ireland. And I think almost being part of the island of Ireland and trying to accept a certain amount of Irishness. If you go back to the 90s or the early 2000s, that would have been you would have been very scared, I think, in central Belfast to have, just even something like open a very Irish themed restaurant or uh, in Belfast, I came across these places that blew my mind. Basically, tourist kind of places, that you might see in London, selling sort of Irish tat, like kind of like leprechauns and shamrocks with Belfast on it. I mean, you'd never have seen that because you would have ended up like a sort of target for like loyalist fruitcakes, basically. I mean, you really would have been scared to have done that. And I think what's happened is somewhere along the line, I think in Northern Ireland, they got this idea that the way to get the American tourist dollar, which is what they really wanted, right? Why do all the Americans just descend on Ireland every year in droves? They just like throw millions of dollars at the island, but Northern Ireland's just completely left out. And I think for a long time, what Northern Ireland tried to do was sort of sell itself as a unique experience, the Troubles and its own history and all the rest of it. And actually, what they figured out along the way is actually, let's not do that. Let's just actually sell ourselves as this is just another part of Ireland that's really beautiful and has all this stuff like the Giant's Causeway, etc., that you should see. And that seems to have worked. So that's, when I was in Belfast, the entire hotel was taken up with American tourists. It was fascinating to see. Again, something you wouldn't have seen 20 years ago. Anyway, I mention all this the other thing, actually, no, this is important, is I was amazed at how much less expensive everything was in Northern Ireland, and yet everything seemed more prosperous. So everybody seemed to be spending less and making more. Like it seems like the whole economy, and I don't doubt for a second that some of it, like, a lot of that is Brexit. The fact that they're in the single market, essentially, they're in this special place, and it's helping their economy. I've zero doubt about that, having been there now. I think what all this adds up to is I think the loyalists are in a very, very weird place. So I went to see a guy who runs a big business up there, um, and he comes from a very loyalist background. Very like he's got roots in Northern Ireland that go back. His great grandfather kind of like started the business, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, very, very loyalist background. And he was like, well, I think the United Ireland is going to happen in the next 20 years. And we're all very relaxed about it. I mean, part of it as well is, again, as a result of Brexit, it's amazing when you talk to businesses in Northern Ireland, what's happened. Like when you see it on the ground and you go, of course, right? they've all started to trade way more with Ireland and the rest of the European continent than they used to. Because they used to just run everything because it was just sort of old school. They used to run so much through Great Britain. So, for instance, this guy, if he gets something from France or Ireland or the Republic, he just gets it and it's all done. And it's like it's all just completely. It's like it was before we left. So he's like, well, look, I really hated to say goodbye to the Welsh distributor. I mean, we'd had them for like 20 years, but at the end of the day, it was just like, sorry, I can't really do this. And I think this is going to be a big problem for all the loyalist parties. And you're seeing it in every single way. So in Northern Ireland, you're seeing already the fact that the nationalist vote is increasing. And actually, the sort of non-aligned vote is massively increasing. That's why you're seeing the alliance, for instance, becoming bigger. And I think we'll continue to see that. The alliance getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Just a group of, basically a party that is like, we don't want to get involved in the sectarian, whatever, what we want. It's just whatever's good for the Northern Irish economy. I think that's going to be increasingly um, attractive to voters. And I think you have all these loyalist parties. So you've got the UUV, you've got the DUP, you've got the TUV, and they all kind of hate each other and they're all at each other's throats and they're all becoming less and less relevant. So it's like it's all sinking into the mist. And particularly given the fact that they're all allied to Brexit, which was the thing that actually ultimately I think will be seen to have destroyed loyalism and led to a united Ireland. And Brexit was far and away the biggest factor in that.
What I can't quite see is the path to victory, if you like, for reform.
Mm.
And the reason behind that, saying, can they really get a majority?
Yeah.
Obviously, it can be a bit of um, a mess anyway. We just don't know what it's going to be like with the number of parties we've got. But if
Mm.
not, which seems unlikely, how can they get any coalition together? And I can't see most of the parties wanting to work with them. And even if the Tories did, it seems to me to
Mm.
be a huge trap for them, particularly if they're the junior partner to reform. And it would almost be as bad for them as it was for the Lib Dems under Cameron, etc. So
Yeah.
it's really where you're going to get to. And the only way I can see it is if you had a sort of inconclusive election and then maybe one, maybe two down the line, because I just can't see people working with them on unless they've got somewhere close to a majority.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right in terms of their ability to attract coalition partners is pretty much non-existent. I think even with the Tories, I mean, partly for the reasons that you mentioned, but also just you'd have a split, right? Like, let's say there's like 50 Tory MPs. You'd have a group in there who would just say, I won't work with Farage. I just won't do it. I don't care. I won't do it. And then someone who would melt in, and that would sort of ultimately destroy the Conservative Party. Like it would kind of be that would really be the death knell. Because some of them would just would become Reform MPs, I think, and then there would be a sort of rump, One Nation something. But here's the thing, I think it's undervalued how much Reform could get a majority. I think there's still a kind of I think it's really underpriced, their ability to get a majority. And a lot of it has to do with external factors, right? It has less to do with like the appeal of Farage or what he's selling or any of that than just the fact that I, one of the things I've really picked up traveling around the country over the last year and a half, and some of it was, before the general election, lots of it after, is the Tories are really hated around the country in a way that I think that a lot of people don't appreciate. And I know people are like, I think a lot of people on this call will not be, they probably won't be conservatives or fans of the Conservative Party. So, but so I'm not saying this to just appeal to you. What I'm saying is people really, really hate the Conservative Party. I talked to a guy, it was in the Midlands, it was in Rugby, financial consultancy, about 30 employees. Yeah, it was in Rugby. And he was telling me about, et cetera, et cetera. We were in his office, it was quite big, and he had a bunch of pictures on his wall. And one of them was a picture of a much younger version of himself and Margaret Thatcher. And clearly it was something that he had got because he was almost certainly a local Tory organizer, and he was one of three people who would have been, who would have done enough in the local area, who would have got a picture taken with the Prime Minister when she came through on her one kind of ever um, campaigning visit. And anyway, he had it framed and it was in his office. And I said something to him like, "Oh well, I guess the Tories can at least rely on your vote." And he shook his head and he was, very, he sort of didn't want to talk about it, but we were on it. So he just did. And he said, "No, I'm going to vote Labour. I've never even thought about voting Labour, but the Conservative Party just they don't care about people like me anymore. They don't, they're not going to do anything for people like me anymore. They don't care about people who run small businesses like me. The Tories just care about whatever, blah, blah." And I heard this so many times. I heard this again and again and again. And so I think you have to understand, like, if you imagine like so much of the old Tory vote is going to go to reform, I think way more than people think. That's why I think they can get a majority, because that's still quite a rump of people. And I really think, I mean, genuinely, I'm trying to find a bookie now who will take a bet from me, because I obviously want to get good odds on this, on the Conservative Party having 0 seats at the next election, because I think it's possible enough that I would like to have a punt on it. Zero. No Tory MPs. I think they could be totally and completely wiped out because basically they have alienated every single part of the country, every single part of their business people don't like them, wealthy people don't like them, poor people don't like them, Northerners don't like them, people in the Midlands don't like them, people in the Southwest don't like them. Everybody has their own reasons why they don't like them. I just feel like so much of that vote is just going to go to reform, and it's going to get worse and worse. After the May 26 elections, if they go like the polling suggests, where again, reform pick up like 700 seats or whatever, and they basically become the second party in Wales, and they do really well in Scotland, or at the very least, what they do in Scotland is they basically just destroy the Tories there. I think you build up a narrative where the Tories are dead. And we're kind of already there anyway. But like once you've had the 25 election cycle and then the 26 election cycle where the Tories have been completely and utterly destroyed, basically all the messaging is going to turn around on the Tories, right? The Tories want to say, well, look, maybe you like reform and maybe you like Farage, but actually it's a wasted vote because they can't win. People will just go, well, that's obviously crap. I mean, they're winning more than you are. So I still think it's underpriced. But you're right. If they find themselves in a minority situation, it's tough. But having said that, Farage would deal with that, wouldn't he? What would Farage say? He'd say, "We haven't had quite enough, and like we have this program for government or whatever," which he wouldn't have. He'd have nothing. I mean, he'd have so in a sense, it's almost better for him than if he has a massive majority. Because if he has a massive majority, then it's like, well, he just has to get on with it, right? There's no excuses. Whereas if he has a minority government, he can say, "Well, I've been stopped by the establishment and all that crap." So it might even work for Farage. Sadly, won't work for the country.
Up until about 2 minutes ago, you hadn't mentioned Scotland,
Yeah,
and I'm just interested because you don't often mention Scotland in your very good blog posts or whatever you call them. I do read very much
yep.
like, and I know you an answer occasionally, but it's Brexit, as you would know, is extremely unpopular in Scotland, and
Yeah.
yet they've got the Labour Party, Scottish Labour Party,
Mm.
kind of wedded to Starmer and his make Brexit work position. I mean, is that sustainable?
I mean, no, I don't think it ever was. I think one of the real problems with Labour, I think, was this is nationwide, and I promise I will come back to Scotland in particular. Um, is his essential thing was he was trying to put together a kind of voting coalition that he thought would win. And in a sense, he was right. The strategy was completely correct to win the election. That's why he got 400 seats. And he managed to get 400 seats on whatever it was, 34% of the vote. That wasn't a fluke. That was actually because the electoral strategy was bang on and actually quite well thought out. The problem was always going to be, okay, having ran on that and ran on that platform, right? and ran on the, we're not going to change any of the fiscal rules, but we're also not going to put up tax, and we're going to make Brexit work, and all these things. As soon as he comes into government, all these things are going to be massively difficult, impossible, really, to pull off. And I think it was that sort of, I think they really had an idea of, let's just get over the line, let's win the election, and then we can figure it out. And the problem is they're here now, having won the election, and they don't really know what to do. And what you're seeing in Scotland is obviously, as you say, Scotland being the most obviously an entrenched anti-Brexit part of the country, particularly given like it voted massively against it in the first place, right? So it wasn't even like a Wales thing where they voted for Brexit, but then there's been a bit of buyer's remorse. So Scotland didn't even vote for it. It was shoved onto Scotland in the first place. And I don't know how they didn't think that that was going to help the SNP somewhere along the line, but it always comes back to this idea. I think the thing about Brexit is I think you get into magical thinking with it. I think Starmer was like, and I've seen this in politicians before. Well, I don't really understand Brexit and I was against it and I didn't think it should happen. However, there must be something in it because we voted for it. People are attached to it and etc. And so I'm sure when I get to number 10 and I'm there, I will sort of magically understand the upsides to it and how it all works. We'll make Brexit work. And there must be something. They got there and they were like, no, uh, we are where we are and it is what it is. And what's happening in Scotland isn't particularly surprising as a result. If you're trying to sell to people, no, I know the Tories screwed this up, but we'll make this work. And then you're on, and people go, well, this is the same rubbish thing that we didn't like in 2016. We're now almost 10 years on. Sorry, no. And I'm sure it's fueled the independence movement. I'm sure it's just fueled the SNP over and above that. Because like I say, they didn't vote for it, the Scots didn't vote for it in the first place. So why should they? They're even less patient with any of trying to make it work.
There are two pro-Brexit parties out there, Lib Dem and Green Party. And they both, right now, they both have more seats in Parliament than Reform. And but with the first past the post system, they're diluting votes. What if there was a coalition between Lib Dem and Green? That has been tried once, but it fell apart. But what if we could make it work? A coalition between Lib Dem and Green, so that they would stop running candidates against each other, and then they would pick and choose which constituencies each one would run in, and then that might improve it. That would improve the chances of getting seats. Would it be enough to take on Reform?
So several things. One is the Lib Dems are in an odd position. And when you look at what the Lib Dems do, I think without understanding the electoral coalition they're trying to put together, some of what they do can seem a bit odd. But the Lib Dem MPs right now, they've got 72 MPs, and they are mainly in what seats that basically, under the normal run of things, right, should be Tory. They are basically Tory seats, the vast majority of them. But a particular type of Tory, right, which the Conservative Party have completely alienated, partly through Brexit, and actually even the bits that aren't Brexit are sort of Brexit related. Because I think one of the things that Brexit made the Tories do is they became less moderate, they became less business orientated, they became less focused on that end of things that they used to. One of the things that they used to be focused on was the guy who lives in Surrey or Hertfordshire who works in London, commutes in, makes decent money, doesn't want his taxes to go up too much, is worried about the price of schools. There's a sort of general thing about this person, but they're probably like, particularly given they work in London, they're quite culturally liberal. And anyway, for a long time, the Tories were very able to keep hold of this type of voter. And whatever was thrown at them, the Lib Dems actually tried for years and years and years to get at this type of voter, basically on the social liberal stuff. And in the end, they just couldn't prize them away in numbers. And it really took till, the combination of Brexit, then May, then Johnson, then Truss. Like, it was basically just like punching these people in the face, like again and again and again. And they basically went, okay, that's it. And so they've sort of gravitated towards the Lib Dems, not really particularly as a positive Lib Dem, as I love the Lib Dems and they really, they're for me. It's more a case of the Tories have gone mad and I'm never going to vote Labour, but I quite like the coalition government and actually they seem all right and almost to some extent a misunderstanding of what the Lib Dems stand for. But the point being is that the Lib Dems are eager to keep that going. One of the reasons that you see the stunts, and that Davey does the stunts, is he doesn't really want to talk that much about policy. Basically, most of those people just want a kind of like centristy West Tory party. That's really what they want. And the Lib Dems are the closest thing to it, so in their mind, so they'll just sort of vote for it. So the problem with the Lib Dems is if they went in with the Greens, that would blow that apart because immediately they would be like, well, now I'm voting for the Green Party. I'm not going to do that. I don't know who I'm going to vote for. Maybe I just won't even bother to vote. So I think that's a problem for the Lib Dems. Boris Johnson had sold it and people bought it, and of course it was all crap and rubbish, and we all know that. But he sold it well in the face of people not really arguing it particularly well. The Corbyn project had basically run its race and it was kind of over and they just had no energy behind them and the Lib Dems didn't really know how to campaign. And so, to what extent Farage laying down arms and helping the Tories in that electoral pack, we don't know. But generally speaking, I think electoral packs can be quite dangerous because voters don't really like it. Because voters can see it as you're taking I think it's one of those differences, I think, between when you're trying to manufacture something under that would be more PR, sometimes it can backfire on you. I mean, the point of PR is actually everyone can vote for who they want, right? It is one of the selling points of PR. And also, I think the Greens could be damaged in a weird way.